Hey everybody, welcome to the Behind the Screen podcast. I'm John Aljets, and joining me once again this week is my good buddy Owen.
How's it going, everybody? Good to be back.
Now, Owen, we need to talk about The Mandalorian.
Yes, we do. I just finished watching season 1 like an hour and a half before I came over here.
And it's fantastic, right?
It is easily the best thing Disney has done with the Star Wars property to date.
Oh yeah, by far.
I am a kind of a sequels hater. I thought Rise of Skywalker was really, really bad.
This isn't the first that we've had this discussion.
Which is the reason it took me so long to watch The Mandalorian, because The Rise of Skywalker kind of soured me on the franchise for a minute.
But we need to talk about The Mandalorian, and I'm not talking just like the story, which, I mean, of course we're going to talk about that. And I don't mean just Baby Yoda. Of course we're going to talk about Baby Yoda. Everybody loves Baby Yoda. But we need to talk about the tech, the behind-the-scenes stuff that has allowed this series to be made and has allowed it to look as amazing as it does.
That's one of the first things that struck me when I started watching the show, was just how good it looked. And there's usually a pretty big gap between how a big budget movie looks and how a TV show looks. The gap is getting smaller.
Yeah.
I think Game of Thrones is a really good example of how good a TV show can look.
Not how good a TV show can end, though.
We're not going to talk about that today. But The Mandalorian just looks like a high-budget film, yet I think the budget for all 8 episodes of season 1 was somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million.
Something like that.
Which, I mean, considering they've spent, $500 million on the Justice League movie?
It's quite the chunk.
Considering you've got way more screen time for The Mandalorian, it's kind of amazing how they managed to pull this off.
But, with all that being said, with sort of this show's unexpected critical and financial success, like as you said, it's real low budget, but it's pulling in dollar bills for Disney right now. Disney might just be eyeing these smaller productions the same way that I look at my grandma's lemon bars, drooling. So there's a lot that we need to discuss here, and we're going to get right to that here on YouTube and Spotify. So, okay, as I said, we need to talk about the tech. We got to get into how they've made this show as such like a smaller production as it is.
Yeah, the whole thing is basically shot in a warehouse in LA.
Yeah.
And, you are used to seeing really good visual effects everywhere these days.
Pretty much, yeah.
But visual effects, for anyone who doesn't know, like everything that goes into it, it is an insane amount of work.
Oh, yeah.
And if you've ever seen like the behind the scenes on the Star Wars prequels, they're doing everything in these blue screen studios with some actual props that the characters can interact with.
But really, there's not a lot for them to mess with.
Yeah, especially in, the hello there scene that all the prequel memers out there love. Yeah. It's just Ewan McGregor in a blue room.
And when you have actors who are shooting on like these green screens or blue screens and stuff like that, it's often worth remembering that they have no idea what the area actually really looks like around them. They might have a basic like general description, but for the most part, they don't really know if they're looking at like a brick wall or a vast landscape.
Yeah, I mean, they do the previs stuff with the directors and the art departments, all that stuff. The director can describe to them, like, this is what you're looking at, but there's no real way for an actor to be able to fully be aware of what it's going to look like in the end product.
But that's not the case with The Mandalorian.
No, The Mandalorian does something really interesting. There's a featurette on Disney Plus that I highly recommend everyone go watch, called The Gallery.
Yeah.
And they have a whole episode talking about this, interviewing Jon Favreau and all the directors of each episode and Dave Filoni. Check it out. It's awesome. So they have this thing they call it the volume. It's essentially just a big stage with video screens on the ceiling and all around the stage.
And these aren't just like your normal, like, the kind of TVs that you have in your living room. These are these are HDR screens. They're really high-end, super high fidelity screens.
Crazy pixel count.
Yes. And they're basically projecting the environment on these screens.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about the reason it looks so good is that they actually take real life photos and other things like that, and then they build them back digitally and put them up on the projection, and it blends into what they have on the stage.
Yeah,
so seamlessly. It's incredible if you actually see it in action.
Now what they're projecting up there, these aren't like photos of real locations. This isn't video of real location. The environments are actually rendered in real time using the Unreal 4 game engine. It's video game technology being utilized to create environments that are hyper realistic. That's like some Tron stuff right there.
Yeah, for real.
It's really just both fantastic and interesting to see this merging of these two mediums that have often gone kind of hand in hand, but haven't really directly crossed over all that much.
But yeah, it's definitely the culmination of a bunch of different, maybe not the culmination, but it is the convergence of all these different pieces of technology. Like you have LED technology, which isn't even that old.
No.
Like before it was all LCD and plasma screens. Now we have LEDs and those keep getting better. And then we have these game engines that can render faster, render better images. And then you have the real-time tracking data for the camera, because that's a really important part too.
Yeah, because as the camera is moving, the environment has to shift.
And it does it all in real time.
Yeah, and it's like some freaking wizardry stuff. Like, it's so crazy. But the thing is that it's worth realizing that this is incredible and it's fantastic and it's gonna revolutionize the way that films are made. And we're gonna touch upon how in a second here. But it's worth pointing out that really this concept, if you put enough time and energy into it, you could almost do something like this at home.
Yeah, there's a YouTuber, his channel is called Cinematography Database, but his name is Matt Workman, and he's been doing stuff like this in his living room.
Yeah,
with
and
like
I
a
know
virtual
that,
camera.
Sam from Corridor Digital is working on getting Corridor set up to be able to do this sort of stuff. And as I said, you can do this for yourself at home because Unreal Engine, for those of you who don't know, you can go download right now and start working with it and learn how to use it. I've been doing that actually for a while now, trying to learn how to do all the coding and all the rendering and stuff. It's a lot, a bit too much for this podcast, but you can go and download it right now. It's free. Jump into it, learn how to use it. It only costs you money if you make a game with it. So like if you're just going to be playing around, I'm sure that Epic Games will come up with some monetization scheme for if you use it for video.
Oh yeah, they'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out if they don't already have something that they have worked out. I know that it's not usually talked about, but the point is that this is like, there was a point in time where green screen and blue screen wasn't really something that you could do at home, and then it became a lot more accessible to people. Nowadays, people use green screen effects while they're live streaming on Twitch.
Yeah.
So now it's like super accessible. Everybody can do it. Your mom could probably learn how to green screen something and not have an issue. So there might come a time where you could be producing something that looks like The Mandalorian in your living room with no effort.
Yeah, and speaking of effort, I think that's one thing that this technology allows them to just streamline the entire production process. So one thing Jon Favreau talks about in that featurette is that when they were filming the Jungle Book movie, which uses some similar techniques, they were using traditional like lighting setups with big sky panels and all these things. And you have your storyboards and you have your previs, and we've worked on sets before. Everyone knows you have these ideas, and once you actually get on set, it's probably not going to work out exactly like you thought it would.
Yeah, you got to adjust on the fly.
So, you've got to move this light up a bit, and then you spend all this time rigging new lights and doing all these things. But
the reality of grip work is often disappointing.
We've done it. We know.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing about these screens and filming in this way is that the light sources come from the screen. And so what they were able to do is just have all the props, the physical props on the stage part, and then be able to change around the environment. Like if you have a passage of time, you can do that. There was that scene, I think in episode 5 on Tatooine, where the rookie bounty hunter is watching their bounty, and a bunch of time goes by and it's just a different time of day. They can just flip a switch.
Yeah.
And it's nighttime now. And they could have a scene they want to shoot at dawn, and they can keep it going for the entire day's shoot.
Yeah, you could have 12 hours of twilight, or the magic hour. You could have magic hour all day.
All day.
Suddenly, it's not magic hour anymore.
Like you were saying for the actors, we were talking about the prequels a little bit and how they're really difficult for the actors to imagine all these different scenes. But when the actors are on the volume, they're seeing everything.
Yeah.
They have Carl Weathers on that featurette. He talks about how there's that scene in the finale where they're going through the lava tunnel, and he's like, the exit of the tunnel is just getting bigger before his eyes. And so he doesn't have to imagine anything.
Yeah, it's almost like he's physically there in this location that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's worth pointing out, they did shoot on traditional sets.
For when it called for it.
In some cases, they did shoot on traditional sets. So, like, this isn't something where it's like, oh, it was always this crazy, like, rear projection thing. They did use real locations, but for good chunks of it, in fact, I would say, like, the vast majority of, anytime they were outside for the most part, and even some of the internal
a lot
shots,
of the interiors, yeah.
These places don't exist, and they've never existed and will never exist.
If you can't tell, we're really psyched on this.
Yeah, I'm super pumped. Because, like, here's the thing is that, like, as you said, we've been on sets. We've worked on sets. We've done production work. And so we know how much of a pain in the butt some of this stuff can be. And knowing that there's tech out there that's going to allow us to have these amazing visuals and not having to spend 3+ hours to set up a shot.
To go on location, like lug all these heavy lights and a generator, all these things that we've done. I mean, we worked on very small productions that require you to wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is ever going to replace traditional filmmaking, but to get something that looks as good as The Mandalorian does for like $100 million for 8 episodes, I mean, that's a high price for a traditional TV show, but Disney needed a really cool first party thing to put on Disney Plus to get people to subscribe. Yeah, they needed to
sell Disney Plus, and Mandalorian sells Disney Plus.
It does.
It's just such a fantastic thing, and I'm really curious to see, how could this affect production of films, TV shows moving forward? Do we think that future Star Wars movies are going to be shot like this?
I think that is the way they're filming The Mandalorian is the way George Lucas would have wanted to film the prequels, but there just wasn't the technology available. Hence why they did all the blue screen and why it looks kind of not great now.
Yeah.
Because with, working with blue screen, like I said at the top, it is so difficult, and you have to, like, the Mandalorian's costume would not work on a green screen.
No, it's too reflective.
So reflective. Like, you'd have to eliminate like the green reflections, then you'd have to put in reflections in post, and it'd be just such a hassle.
It could be done, but it would just be...
And balloon that budget.
Yeah, it would be annoying. So, we got a little bit there at the end talking about the prequels and sort of what they were doing tech-wise. And it got me thinking that, Star Wars has a long history of just impacting pretty much every aspect of production, pop culture, everything. It's
yeah,
huge.
I mean, we think about Star Wars from a fan perspective more of, what it does for the culture, like Jedi and Darth Vader and Yoda, all these iconic characters that we know and love. But on the other side, one of the things I don't know if many people know is that Lucasfilm started Industrial Light and Magic,
which is huge.
Yeah, I mean, ILM is the visual effects company. Like, more and more pop up. There's a lot more of them now, but I remember growing up, I was one of those weird kids who actually like watched the credits of movies. Not saying if you don't watch the credits you don't love movies, but whatever.
It's a certain, like, you're on like an upper tier of film nerd.
You would see credits for almost every single movie. ILM.
Even movies that like weren't in any way produced by like Lucasfilm or that George Lucas had any hand in, you would see ILM taking part.
I mean, ILM is why George Lucas is a billionaire.
Basically, yeah.
And there's a lot of really cool techniques that they were using on the original series, like all the space battles and stuff was
a lot of miniature work.
Yeah.
And beginning with blue screen. You see that on the original trilogy. And yeah, sure, that technology had existed for a long time, but it was really pushed to the forefront with Star Wars. And as we pointed out, the money that Lucas made from that original trilogy allowed him to establish Lucasfilm, allowed him to establish Industrial Light and Magic, which would go on to basically push special effects forward industry-wide. I mean, yeah, sure, Industrial Light and Magic also worked on stinkers like Spawn, but...
But with ILM, they bring in so many people from different industries. Like the creators of Adobe Photoshop ended up working at ILM, and one of the people who are really integral to working on the Unreal Engine started at Industrial Light and Magic. They talk about that Jon Favreau knew someone who worked at Epic Games.
That has to be a heck of a flex when you're going into like a job interview and someone is like, oh, what kind of like qualifications do you have for this job? Oh, nothing. I just invented Photoshop.
Just invented it, you know.
That's a flex.
And like you were saying, a lot of these techniques have been around since the invention of film.
Or at least like a lot of the theory behind them. So like
rear projection.
Yeah, is basically what The Mandalorian is doing.
And that was on stuff like the original King Kong from the 30s used rear projection.
Yeah, rear projection's been around since film's been around.
And it's all a lot of refinement of the same sort of concept of taking your actors and putting them in a place that's not real.
And do you know who does a lot of that refinement?
Industrial Light and Magic.
ILM.
Yeah.
And like we saw that hugely with the prequels.
Yeah.
You know, as much as we might like kind of crap on the prequels a little bit, and as much as it's kind of in vogue to make fun of the prequels and talk about them as bad movies and all sort of stuff, at least among certain people, prequel memers out there, I know that you guys like think it's blasphemy to say anything negative about your film. I apologize for all of that. But anyways, as much as we might dump on those movies for having bad dialogue, not the best acting, all that sort of stuff, the tech at the time, super solid.
Yeah, it was on the cutting edge of technology.
I would say that green screens and blue screens became as prominent in the 2000s because of the prequels. Nowadays, you see green screens are on pretty much every set. Even if it's just like, oh, you know, we're blocking out the background with a green screen so that we could throw that in there later. You know, you look at something like Gone Girl, for instance. You look at some of the behind the scenes stuff for that, and even though they're shooting in like an actual location, they'll have a giant green screen in behind a house or something, just because like, oh well, we're gonna just use that to swap it out. And I feel like that became a lot more commonplace after the prequel.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. We've talked about David Fincher a couple times. All of his movies and shows have so much visual effects in there, a lot of green screen, a lot of background replacement, and you just don't know.
Yeah, because it's and like that's just how things are made these days.
Yeah,
for the most part. So you got to kind of wonder if now are we going to see these shifts away from green screen and blue screen to more use of the volume.
I think we are.
Yeah,
it's as I was saying before, it's so much easier to work this way. You don't have to imagine what the set's going to look like later. You don't have to deal with removing green or blue reflections off of an actor or all these other things. You don't have to do as much rigging. Once you have the setup, you can turn it into whatever you want. And I definitely see this being more the future. And one thing Kathleen Kennedy was talking about in that featurette was you don't have to do all this work to see a finished product. Like you can do dailies. A daily is like a quick cut, a quick edit of a scene because everything's done in camera. So if they try to do dailies with all this blue screen, it's not really going to look like anything.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about a scene like, for instance, you know, Obi-Wan's encounter with Grievous, where it's like, okay, you could do a daily of that, but like it's Ewan McGregor just standing in a blue void.
Unless you have all these like VFX artists there to like put everything in that day, which isn't really going to work because you got to do all this rendering.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So it's just so much easier to work with this way, and I definitely see it being the future. Like I had known about what they were doing to a certain degree before watching the series, but now that I've actually dug into it, I am convinced this is the future.
Yeah. This is something that like I feel like if you work in film, and some of you who listen, I know do, and we certainly do, I feel like you need to start preparing yourself to adjust to this manner of filmmaking.
The first thing I texted you was like, we need to buy a warehouse and build this setup.
Yeah, we need to get a loan and we need to build a volume and open it up so that like people could come in and use our space. Maybe that is a business plan. Maybe I'll cut this chunk out of the podcast and we'll keep that to ourselves.
I mean, anyone can do it. It's just who's the first going to do it in your area.
I'm not going to tell you where our area is, but it's going to be us. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be crazy, I think, to see, because I feel like Disney's going to, for sure, 100%. continue to use this tech and might adopt it for things like maybe the future MCU series will be shot in this manner. Maybe Loki is being shot in this manner. It wouldn't surprise me with something like Loki, because something like Loki, you're going to be probably expecting more fantastical environments, probably more outdoor stuff. I don't know. We'll see. But like this would be a great candidate for that. So Disney's definitely probably going to continue to use it. It'll be a trip to see when other studios adopt the technology. When you see, Universal using it on the next Jurassic Park film, I think that's going to be kind of your big signaling that this is becoming mainstream, as it were.
Yeah, we'll see. There is a setup process involved, and there is a baseline investment.
Yeah, there's overhead that you need to have to get into it.
Once you have it,
you can use it for basically anything, and it is way cheaper than building sets. As you pointed out, there is the little bit of art department work on the floor that the actors are on, but really that's it.
Yeah.
Making
sure it blends in, making sure everything in the foreground, like it's actually physically on the stage, blends in perfectly with the screens, which if you watch The Mandalorian, it's seamless, absolutely seamless. There's a moment in the featurette where they're talking about like people in the art department doing some switching of this scene in the hangar in episode 6, where there's like all this welding going on and there's like smoke coming up on the screen. And someone thought there was an actual fire on the set because the smoke looks so real, and it's wild. It's wild stuff.
All right, so we've done a lot of talking, and let's be honest, a lot of gushing.
We could keep talking.
We could very much. In fact, we just took a break there, and we spent the entire break still talking about like the tech and how cool it is. But you know what else is also really cool? The show itself.
The show is really good. Like I said at the top, I haven't been thrilled with what Disney has done with Star Wars since they acquired it. It took me a while to actually get into the series because having seen Rise of Skywalker, I'm like, man, this is
it bummed you out.
It was a blow to my Star Wars fandom.
I remember you messaging me after you watched Rise of Skywalker, and you were just like, I think I'm done with Star Wars. He's like, I think I'm just done.
I needed a break.
Yeah.
I needed a little break, and this series was a breath of fresh air. I've been pitching or wanting, maybe not pitching is probably too strong, but I've been wanting a series just like this for a long time.
And I remember you were, because like before the series came out and we only got like really stills and a little bit about this, you were much more excited about this than I was. You were like, this looks like what I want.
It looked like what I want, and it turned out to be what I wanted. I've
been telling you that for a year. I've been telling you that it's exactly what you want.
I needed a break. It was a good break, but having smaller scale stories, getting more in depth with a character, somehow, despite the fact that he wears the helmet the entire series, aside from that one shot,
99.99999% of the time, yes.
He's characterized really well, and I personally liked the sort of episodic storytelling. It's kind of non-traditional now, even though it was traditional before for a television series to just have like sort of self-contained episodes.
Yes.
Now it seems like every TV show has to have this big narrative, which it has in the background with Baby Yoda as like the big overarching thing that kind of drives the story forward. But most of the episodes are just like he's doing a job.
Yeah, or he's like found himself on a planet and he's got to like do a thing.
He's got his ship got damaged, so he has to land and get some cash to pay for the repairs.
Yeah,
that's the plot of the episode, and that is great. I loved it.
That being said, with season 2 so far, and I'm gonna avoid spoilers, but so far we have seen more or less just more of the sort of episodic stuff. Of course, we're only 2 episodes in, so like who knows how much of it is gonna tie all together.
I was reading up on the show after watching it to prepare for the podcast, and one reviewer, I forgot their name, described it as a single dad looking for a job.
Yeah.
And that is a really good way to describe it.
And that is what it is. Like Mando is just a single dad bumming around the galaxy trying to take care of his kid.
Yeah.
I almost feel like even if you aren't a fan of Star Wars, you could watch The Mandalorian and get something out of it.
Yeah, it's...
Because it can be standalone.
It can be. You don't need to know all the little details.
It helps to know, like, who the Empire are. And, you know, in season 1, you get all these flashbacks to when Mando was a kid. And, like, you see the like, battle droids and stuff blowing up his planet. It's cool if you know who those, like, what those are and you know about the Clone Wars. It's cool, but it's not necessary.
No, it's really not necessary. It's like, yeah, it's definitely not necessary because in the first episode, the filmmaking makes it clear that Werner Herzog and all these stormtroopers are bad guys, even if you don't know already stormtroopers are bad guys. The way the the way they shot it, like, it's easy to tell. It's like it's the language of cinema. You know that these guys are bad.
Yeah,
you don't necessarily need to know their connection to all these other things.
And you could also watch that and tell that they're bad guys who are on the back foot, because you can tell that the stormtroopers are kind of desperate.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they're kind of like on the ropes. And you can gather a lot of that from just watching the way that it's presented to you without knowing Star Wars.
Yeah, and you don't need to know that, like, oh, it takes place X number of years after this film and in between this series and all these other things.
And anything that you do need to know, like Cara Dune's backstory and like how that relates to like the Battle of Endor and all that sort of stuff, they mention. So like, you don't 100% need to have seen Star Wars. But that being said, you know, I want to talk a little bit about like how the Mandalorian might affect Star Wars in general. Obviously, there's the tech side. We did mention a little bit of like, it wouldn't surprise me if the next Star Wars movie uses the volume to at least some degree. Maybe not to the same level that the Mandalorian did, where it's like majority of it is on it.
Yeah.
But like, are we going to see maybe more self-contained stories coming from Disney, because they're seeing that the Mandalorian is succeeding where the sequel trilogy kind of didn't?
I really hope so. I think the further they can get away from this time period in the Star Wars chronology that begins with The Phantom Menace and ends with Rise of Skywalker, it seems like, I mean, The Mandalorian takes place in this chronology as well, but the further they can get away from the 9 main films, I think the better. Especially right now in the interim, because I feel like there's gonna be another like Star Wars saga eventually, whenever it is. But I think what the Mandalorian show as a whole shows to Disney is that they can take some more risks with Star Wars.
Yeah.
Because my main critique of the sequels, Last Jedi notwithstanding, is that it didn't take any risks. It didn't change anything. It didn't
try to do its own thing.
Yeah, The Last Jedi tried, and then
which I think that, and
was rejected.
This is my spicy take for the episode, is that I feel like of the sequel trilogy, The Last Jedi is the film that is going to age the best. It definitely has some serious problems.
It has massive structural problems.
But the movie, like, they were trying to do new stuff. They were trying to explore new avenues that JJ just kind of walked back on and sort of just ignored.
Yeah, and I think the backlash of The Last Jedi, because we live in a very polarized society, there were a lot of people who loved it, a lot of people who hated it, and
because that's the only thing polarizing our society is whether you love
it's only The Last Jedi. That's it. There's nothing else going on. And I think the backlash frightened Disney a little bit.
Yeah.
I obviously am not in Kathleen Kennedy's mind, but I think it is reasonable to suspect that putting JJ back in charge was at least somewhat in response to the backlash against The Last Jedi. And seeing the additional backlash to Rise of Skywalker, maybe now seeing the way people react to The Mandalorian, the way people reacted to the sequel trilogy, they might be able to take a little more risk, do other things, do things that they might not have thought they'd be able to when they acquired it. That's my hope anyway.
You know, I am very interested to see how, like, what new stories they're going to tell. But to me, the thing that I think that I want to see the most, that I want Disney and Lucasfilm to take away from The Mandalorian more than anything, and I've said this so many times, I feel like a broken record at this point, is I want them to give Star Wars to Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau.
Yeah, that would be really smart.
I want those two to be the Kevin Feige of Star Wars.
The success of the MCU, you can really, 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 obviously so many people involved.
There's a lot of factors,
but you have Kevin Feige's hand on the wheel.
Yeah, he's this guiding force through it all.
If Star Wars had that figure for the sequel trilogy, I don't think it would have ended up like it did.
No, you needed somebody who was going to guide it and focus it. Because it's very obvious with the sequel trilogy that they did not have a plan. They did not have a through line for those 3 movies, and that is the downfall of those 3, I think. If you give Favreau and Filoni the wheel, you give them the control, you give them the authority to guide the way that this series and the franchise is going to go, I think you're going to get Star Wars. Which is the main thing, is that the sequels at times either felt too much like Star Wars, where it's like, okay, you're just doing a pseudo remake, or they just felt like something that was trying to be Star Wars but wasn't. But the point is that, like, Favreau and Filoni have managed to create Star Wars. And I mean, again, Filoni has shown us with Clone Wars and Rebels that he can do good Star Wars.
My final thought, my thing to leave you with for The Mandalorian is that it brought back a very disaffected Star Wars fan.
Which is great because, like, I'm all hyped about Star Wars. Like, you're sitting literally a foot away from a bunch of custom-made lightsabers. Like, I'm ready to go. Like, I'm all about Star Wars. And so having my best friend not really that interested anymore pained me.
Like, I was hyped watching the final 2 episodes of season 1. I'm hyped to get into season 2. I'm hyped to watch some Clone Wars. You know, this is coming from a person who grew up watching the original trilogy over and over again, went to see Phantom Menace in theaters a bunch of times, played all the games.
You cut class with me to go see episode 3.
We did. I remember that. That was a fun day.
Yeah, it was.
And, you know, maybe because I'm a jaded, cynical guy now, Rise of Skywalker almost did it for me.
The years have not been kind.
Almost did me in as far as the fandom goes.
Said, the message you sent me literally said, I think I'm done with Star Wars.
Watching The Mandalorian over this last weekend has, you know, maybe brought me back.
Oh, and if people wanted to share their love of Star Wars with you, where could they find you on the internet?
You can find me on my Twitter account, OwenScott_P. You're mostly going to get some basketball takes. Find me on Instagram for my photography work. Trying to get the YouTube going. It's been a challenge. But you can find me, just search Owen Scott Poole on YouTube.
So go ahead and give him a follow on all his platforms. You can also check me out on Twitter. I am at BenderWaffles, BenderWaffles. I'm also on Instagram under the same thing, but I don't post pretty pictures on Instagram. So, just follow me on Twitter. That's where I am most of the time. You can also find me on YouTube, which if you want to learn about game development, like we kind of touched upon lightly here, go check out my YouTube channel. I teach game development. I don't have any Unreal 4 stuff yet. I'm working on learning the engine myself right now. So once I have that figured out, there will probably be Unreal 4 content over there. So if you're interested in the volume and stuff like that, keep an eye out on my channel. As I said, it's under Bender Waffles there on YouTube, just the same as my Twitter. So, keep an eye out. I might just have stuff up there for it.
This is the way.
This is the way.
So what do you think? Are you as excited about the possibility of the future that this Mandalorian tech might be bringing to us? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or, you can tweet at me if you're not on YouTube. But, if you are on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the channel or follow us on Spotify. Thanks for listening, and stay safe out there.